So have you ever felt stuck? So my talk today is called This Again. And I was thinking about those times in life when you come across a situation that you really have to grow through and you learn some really important lessons. And once you do, it's like the gates of heaven open up and the angels sing and you're like, yes, life is so much easier now. Why didn't I know this before? And then 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 days later, you find yourself in a similar situation and you think, this again? Didn't I already learn this? So what inspired me was the fact that today is Groundhog Day. Who remembers the movie Groundhog Day? Okay. All right, a little recap in case it's been a while or in case you haven't seen it. The movie centers around the holiday Groundhog Day, which is celebrated in Puxatawney. And there is a groundhog named Phil that they bring out, and if he sees his shadow, it means we have 6 more weeks of winter, and if he doesn't see his shadow, it means that we have an early spring. So in the movie, Phil, a weatherman, not a groundhog, played by Bill Murray, has to go and cover this event for the 4th year in a row, and he's not happy about it. And so he goes to Puxatawney, and he can't wait to just be done with the whole thing. I'm going to go, and I'm going to do this report, and then I'm going to go home and hopefully never have to go to that town again. That's what he's thinking. But what ends up happening is on the way home, there's a huge blizzard, which ironically Phil the groundhog predicted and Phil the weatherman did not. So there's this huge blizzard and they get stuck in Puxatawney. But that's just the beginning of it. Because Phil finds that he's in this loop, that every day he wakes up and it's Groundhog Day all over again. So what we find in this movie is that breaking free isn't about an outer change, it's about an inner transformation. So we're going to talk today about getting unstuck, about those times in our life when we say, oh, this again, and we're going to use the movie Groundhog Day as our inspiration and as our example. All right, let's start by talking about some of those ways we get stuck. What are those things that have you saying, oh, this again? For me right now, it's taxes. I mean, it's just absurd to me that I have to do all this paperwork every year. Whose idea was that? I've heard people talk about they end up dating the same person over and over again. Like they're different people, but it's really the same person, right? Anybody resonate with that? Sometimes we find, again and again, we find ourselves in a consciousness of lack. Whether it's, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough friends, I don't have enough creativity. And then we work through that and we grow through that and things are great for a while and then we find ourselves in that consciousness of lack once again. Maybe you find yourself feeling unfulfilled and so you start a new job or take on a new project or make some radical changes in your life and it works for a while. You do feel fulfilled until once again you're feeling unfulfilled. Or maybe you say that you're going to get healthy, you're going to lose weight, you're going to exercise more, and you do really well for a while until you don't. And it's, oh, this again, I got to start all over again. All right, so have you ever found yourself saying this again? All right. So let's look at this cycle that happens when we find ourselves in these challenging situations again and again. So in Groundhog Day, first thing that Phil goes into is denial. He's frustrated, he can't believe, he wakes up in the morning and the radio's playing and he says something like, wow, are you guys playing the track from yesterday? Saying all the same things, the radio broadcasters. And then they say, it's Groundhog Day. And he's kind of confused, but still kind of in denial about what's happening. He walks out into the hallway, a guy stops him, they have the same conversation that they had the day before. He looks at him and says, didn't we do this yesterday? So he's in denial. He's confused and he's frustrated and he definitely doesn't want to be stuck in Puxatawney any longer than he has to, let alone stuck in the same day over and over. There's actually a scene in the movie where he's sitting, kind of lamenting, talking to himself, and he says, what would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing you did mattered? And then it pans over to the random person at the bar next to him who says, yeah, well, that about sums it up for me. So the first stage when we find ourselves stuck is often denial. We want to bury our head in the sand. We want to pretend that it's not really a problem. We don't want to deal with it. We're just going to act like everything's okay. Sometimes we even do spiritual bypassing, which is where we say, all is well, God is good, even though it's not. The reason we find ourselves in denial is often because we just don't want to deal with it, and we feel powerless to change our circumstances. And so when we feel powerless, we have to find a way to cope. We have to find a way to deal with our circumstances that we feel like we don't have any control over. And so usually we start by denying there's even a problem, because it's okay that I can't change it if I just convince myself that nothing needs to change. Anyone ever been there? All right. So once Phil gets through this season of denial, he moves into what I'm calling rebellion. He realizes that there's no tomorrow, which means there's no consequences. He can do whatever he wants. He can eat whatever he wants. He's not bound by all the rules or all the I shoulds of the world. He's not worried about cholesterol or gaining weight or even jail time, because every day he wakes up and the day starts all over again. So rebellion is this attitude of like, well, I'll show them, right? We start to act out a little bit, blaming others for the problems that we have in our lives. Oh, it's all their fault if they would just change. Sometimes we rebel by doing reckless things or changing drastic things in our life just to prove to ourselves that we have some type of control. Because when we realize that we don't have control over our outer circumstances, when we feel like we can't change them, when we're done denying it and pretending it doesn't exist, which is usually because it sticks around long enough that we can't deny it anymore, then we say, okay, well, I'll control whatever I can. Let's try and make myself feel better about this situation. So Phil, initially in the movie, wakes up every day excited because he realized there's no consequences. He can do whatever he wants. And so this rebellion phase, it works for a while, right? He's having fun. He kidnaps the groundhog one day. He steals money from an armored truck and buys a new car. He's having the time of his life. But it doesn't last. And that's the thing about rebellion, is it often leads to even more frustration because we are still letting our outer circumstances dictate how we feel in here. So any sense of control that we're managing to grab onto from our acting out and rebelling and pretending like we have control, it's always temporary. Have you heard that expression, what you resist persists? When we are denying something or when we're rebelling against something, we are still giving it power. We're still saying that this thing that's going on out here has control over me. And the situation out there doesn't change until we change in here. When we're focused on the outer, we're not transforming the experience. We're forgetting principle number 3 when we're constantly trying to fix the problem instead of looking within to what we're really being called to discover. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, wrote, "All things have their origin in mind, and outward appearances are the result of thought. The outer, therefore, has no origin, permanency, or reality in itself. It is produced by thought and can be changed by thought." When we focus on the outer, it's a temporary fix. The inner experience is what we're being called to transform. So before long, Phil's excitement starts to feel empty. His big thing is he's trying to woo this woman, the woman of his dreams. And so the benefit he has by living the same day over and over is he can get to know exactly what she likes and plan the perfect date. And so there's this part of the movie where the date's getting longer and longer, like he's getting better and better, basically creating himself into who she wants him to be and not being himself. But it doesn't work. even with all of that practice and all of that time to create the perfect date for this woman, we get this lovely montage of her just slapping him day after day after day after day as their date ends. And that's because breaking free of cycles is not about outer change. It's not about manipulating people or getting them to act the way you want. It's not about planning the perfect day or doing all the right things. Breaking free is about transforming from the inside out. There's a story in the Gospels in Matthew and Luke about Jesus' time in the wilderness when he's tempted by the devil. Are you all familiar with this story? So, the devil in Unity is metaphysically interpreted to be what Charles Filmer called our sense consciousness, or our little s self, our ego mind, a lot of different words for it. Essentially, that part of ourselves that is so identified with the outer world and not the inner spiritual world. The devil is that part of our minds that thinks this is our only life to live and it's all about me. And that who I am and what my worth is as a person is what everybody else thinks of me, or what accomplishments I can accomplish, or how good my hair looks today, or how much money I have. It's the part of us that's identified with the external and not with our soul, not with the truth of who we are. Then the wilderness is a theme that comes up in the Bible quite a few times as well. It's in this story of Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness as he's preparing for the ultimate transformation. It's also in the Exodus story. So in the Exodus story, the Jewish people, the Israelites, are in Egypt enslaved. And they're moving towards being freed by Moses and moving towards becoming a nation. But meanwhile, they spend a lot of years wandering in the wilderness. So Robert Brummett, he's a Unity minister and author of a book called Finding Yourself in Transition. He has this to say about the wilderness. He says, "We feel stuck in the wilderness because the seeds of rebirth have been sown, but are not yet ready for fruition." So in the wilderness of our lives, when we feel like we're stuck or we're reliving the same day over and over again, it can indeed feel like Jesus, that we're being tested. But really, that time where we're wandering in the desert, that time where we're stuck and just can't seem to break free, it is a necessary and crucial part of rebirth, of transformation, of transitioning from our old way of being into something new and greater, more happiness, more fulfilling, more living in alignment with our soul's path. We can't let go of the old and brush off old patterns of thinking and let go of false beliefs without a transition. So finding ourselves lost in the wilderness of life means that we are on a journey of inner transformation. Robert Brummett goes on to say that there's this struggle in the wilderness between the new consciousness and the old, and that we find ourselves vacillating between faith and the promise of one day to worshiping the golden calf of the past and regressing into old, negative, self-defeating patterns. Have you ever experienced that in your life? Where you make a commitment, whether it's to get healthier, to stop dating the same men over and over, right? To stop caring so much about what people think, to living your purpose. And then you do well for a while, and then you kind of go back into those old patterns. You get sober, and you go a little while, and then you drop back into it. We vacillate between the old and the new because we are in the wilderness. We are in a path of transformation and becoming something new. And yeah, it's not fun to be stuck in the wilderness, but it is necessary because we are being called to something bigger. So what the wilderness stories and what Phil from Groundhog Day remind us is that if you want something to change in your life, you are the one who has to change. So Phil does finally start to change. And I tried to calculate it the last time I watched this movie. At one point, he mentions, somebody asked him, how long would it take to get good at that? And he said, oh, about an hour a day, every day for 7 months. So I think Phil is stuck in this time loop for like at least a year. Like it's a while that he's stuck in this time loop. Hopefully it doesn't take us all that long with our transformations, but sometimes it does. So Phil finally starts to change. He starts doing things just for the sake of doing them. He starts going around the town and actually talking to people and meeting people and finding beauty in this town that originally he hated so much. He starts taking piano lessons and learning to play the piano. And I'm sure impressing his piano teacher, who every day he shows up and says, well, technically today's my first lesson. He learns how to do ice sculptures. And then he starts going around taking care of people. There's a scene where these ladies are in this car and they get a flat tire and he's right there with the jack and the perfect size tire and they don't even have a second to think. He fixes their tire for them. He catches a boy falling out of a tree and even makes a comment that he never says thank you. Every single day, Phil's catching this boy falling out of the tree. He never says thank you, but he keeps doing it. What a difference from the curmudgeon that we saw at the beginning of the story. He's finding purpose in helping others. He's finding and following that inner guidance to do things that bring him joy, that bring value to his life, and not playing the victim so much anymore. So rather than continuing to wander in the wilderness for even longer than he already did, Phil turns within and finds an inner purpose, an inner voice that when he finally stops to listen, it was urging him to something better. Because Phil wasn't just physically stuck or temporally stuck on Groundhog Day in Puxawatomie, he was stuck in his life. He had obviously plateaued in his career as a weatherman. He was mad about having to cover this Groundhog Day for 4 years in a row. He felt that this was not a good assignment to have, right? So he had plateaued in his career. He was never able to attract the type of woman he wanted to have a long-term relationship because he tended to manipulate and use people, so that was probably why. And he was a bit of a curmudgeon, kind of negative, not well liked. So the whole movie is a metaphor not just for being stuck in a time loop, but stuck in your life. And so when Phil is finally able to break free of this time loop, it was when he stopped looking at tomorrow or the lack of tomorrow as what drove him, and instead lived in the moment and lived for that day, following his inner guidance, doing things for the joy of doing them, following where he was being led and finding joy in helping others. Only then was he able to attract the woman that he wanted, by being himself and being courageous and being authentic, and finally break free of Puxawatomie, which at the end he said, I'm happy to come back here, I might just move here. So by focusing on his inner experience, saying yes to opportunities, following the inner nudgings, following the joys of his life, he was able to transform. First the inner, and then the outer. So we're not trapped by our circumstances in life. We're trapped by our responses to them. When we find ourselves stuck or wandering in the wilderness, we're not being called to change what's going on out there. We're being called to change what's going on in here and in here. Change your thinking, change your life, right? Real change comes when we stop denying and rebelling about what is, and instead begin to focus on what could be. So when you feel stuck, remember, denial, rebellion, and despair are just going to keep you stuck. Affirm the spiritual truth of your wholeness, your worthiness, and your innate inner power to transform your life from the inside out. That by transforming how you look at a situation, how you think about a situation, and stepping into the wilderness bravely, by tuning in and saying, what am I being called to express? Who am I being called to show up as? By not focusing on the outer, but focusing on the inner, you'll see the outer change. But that's not the goal. The goal is to change in here. So go within, in silence or in meditation and chanting and whatever spiritual practices help you tune in to your true essence. And listen to that still, small voice of spirit. That even in the situations in your life where you feel stuck and you're kind of like Phil in a complete curmudgeon because you just can't wait to get out of this situation you find yourself in, that you know and you can trust Spirit will lead you and guide you out of the wilderness if you just get still enough to pay attention to what Spirit is saying to you. Recognize that your stuckness is a wilderness experience, not a test or a punishment, but an invitation to transformation. And like Phil, allow yourself to be transformed from the inside out, so you never again have to say, oh, this again? So let's take that into meditation. I invite you to get still, get quiet, relax against your chair, close your eyes if that feels comfortable, and just breathe. As we take slow, mindful, deep breaths, we calm our nervous system. We remind our body that it is safe, that it doesn't have to fight or flee, that it is okay to be right where we are right now. I want to invite you now to think about a situation or a relationship or a habit in your life where you're feeling stuck. Like you're living the same day over and over, facing the same challenges again and again. And as you think of that situation, I want you to breathe into it, create space around it. See if you can get to a point where it doesn't feel so fatal, where it doesn't feel like it has so much power over you. Can you expand your awareness just a little bit? So you're almost like an outsider looking into your life. Can you let go just a little bit of how personal and heavy it feels? And can you imagine for a moment that this situation is calling you to transformation? That even the fact that this situation, this thing you would call a problem, is present in your life, the very reason it's there is for you. You made a commitment, you planted the seeds of transformation. And now is the time where you are taking root. Where that new soul growth that you are being called to is getting firmed up in the foundation. And can you say thank you for that? Thank you, Spirit, for being with me as I wander in the wilderness. Thank you, Spirit, for giving me the opportunity again and again to make a different choice. To change from the inside out, to be born anew. Thank you for the stuckness, because I know the power within me is strong enough to overcome. And I know even the most frustrating parts of this day are here for me. So it is. Amen.